Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to Meeting 10 of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. I call the meeting to order. And to ensure that the meeting unfolds correctly, I'd like to share some information with you.
On January 31st, the committee is meeting to study vaccine equity and intellectual property rights. Et comme d'habitude, des services d'interprétation.
We have interpretation services available for the meeting through the global icon at the bottom of the screen. And for members participating in person, keep in mind that the Board of Internal Economy guidelines for the use of masks and health protocols. Please also note that any screenshots or captures of the content are not allowed.
Recognize you by name, and when speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And when you're not speaking, I would ask that you put your microphone on mute. And also a reminder to members and witnesses that comments should be addressed through the chair. Just before we begin, I'd like to flag that we have a number of hopefully small housekeeping items to deal with at the end of the session, so I would like to reserve some time to take care of that at the end. And without further ado, I'd like to now welcome the officials who are with us today. From the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, we have with us Stephen DeBoer, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Canada to the World Trade Organization. Welcome, sir. Joshua Taba, Director General, Health and Nutrition. Welcome to the committee. From the Department of Industry, we have Daryl Patterson, Director General, and Mark Shan, Acting Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic and Innovation Policy Sector. Welcome. Mr. Taba, I understand that you'll be making the only opening statement before the committee this morning, and so I will turn the floor over to you without further ado for 5 minutes, please. As customary, I will signal colleagues and witnesses with this yellow sheet of paper when you have 30 seconds remaining in your testimony or questioning. It's proven to be an effective method of keeping time, so I'd ask you to just keep an eye out for that. Mr. Taba, the floor is yours for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. It is my pleasure to be here before the committee. I'm joined today from Geneva by my colleague Stephen DeBoer, Canadian Ambassador and Permanent Representative to the WTO. S'appuyant sur des décennies de leadership en santé mondiale, le Canada.
Building on decades of leadership in global health, Canada has been a strong advocate for vaccine equity, supporting a robust, multifaceted global effort to fight the pandemic since the beginning.
Throughout the pandemic, Canada has reinforced its position as a leader in global health and equity. We've done that by championing new mechanisms for the procurement of COVID-19 vaccines and other medical products, and by working collaboratively within the international rules-based trading system to support broader access to vaccines. Canada is committed to supporting equitable global access to COVID-19 vaccines, treatments, and diagnostics. And that's why we've worked hand in hand with the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, or ACT Accelerator, and the COVAX facility towards this goal. COVAX remains the best way to ensure all countries have equitable and timely access to COVID-19 vaccines. Canada has committed $580 million in support and has been a key champion of the facility since its inception nearly 2 years ago. Le COVAX utilise un cadre d'allocation juste, transparent.
COVAX uses a fair, transparent, and equitable allocation framework based on a series of algorithms that assure that the doses are allocated where they are most needed.
0.3 billion doses to 144 countries. Despite some initial challenges in securing the supply it needed last year, COVAX has been well positioned since the fall to meet the supply needs of its members, while also offering integrated end-to-end support. It is the key mechanism to help ensure all countries have what they need to make steady progress towards WHO's goal of achieving 70% immunization rates this year. The donation of vaccines were critical last year when global supply was severely constrained, and they've played a major role in COVAX's effort to ensure all countries have access. Part of Canada's contribution to the facility included $10 million specifically for the development and operationalization of COVAX's dose-sharing mechanism, through which doses offered for donation by any country are matched with the countries that need them, ensuring global efforts are coordinated. De plus, le Canada s'est engagé à donner.
In addition, Canada has committed to donate the equivalent of at least 200 million doses to the COVAX facility by the end of 2022. and has made the equivalent of over 100 million doses available.
That COVAX has shipped to 23 countries on Canada's behalf, and the equivalent of 87 million doses procured through Canada's financial support. Additionally, Canada is one of only 4 countries to pay the full ancillary costs for any doses donated through COVAX. This ensures that the costs for syringes, diluent, and safe disposal materials don't create an additional burden on COVAX or recipient country partners. The global vaccine supply landscape has shifted in recent months, and production and supply now exceed current demand and administration capacity. If the landscape in 2021 was supply constrained, the landscape in 2022 is evolving to be demand constrained. To help address this, Canada will continue to go beyond procurement to also reinforce vaccine delivery and strengthen health systems to ensure that countries have the support they need to turn vaccines into vaccinations. À cette fin, le Canada a fourni 100 millions de dollars pour soutenir la livraison.
To this end, Canada has provided $100 million to support the delivery and distribution of vaccines through the COVAX delivery program, and significant funding has been put in place with the WHO and PAHO.
Increased bilateral and regional support for country-level delivery and administration, including for demand generation. While we have currently moved beyond the situation of supply scarcity we faced last year, we are committed to doing our part to ensure it doesn't happen again by addressing barriers to production and access. We are working with international partners to improve global capacity to manufacture vaccines, both for COVID-19 and beyond. Noted, thank you. Since the onset of the pandemic, Canada has actively worked with other WTO members and international partners to identify and address concrete barriers to access, such as supply chain constraints and export restrictions. As Ambassador DeBoer is in attendance today, he can speak to Canada's engagements at the WTO and provide the latest from there. Le Canada reconnaît que l'accès mondial aux vaccins ainsi que leur distribution.
Canada recognizes that global access to and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines depends on several factors beyond intellectual property, including supply chain resilience, distribution challenges, access to technical know-how and expertise, and of course, production capacity and financing.
Diversified vaccine production, Canada announced at the G20 summit last year an investment of $15 million to support COVAX partners and a South African consortium to set up an mRNA technology transfer and manufacturing hub in South Africa. En conclusion, le Canada demeure déterminé à contribuer à l'atteinte de l'objectif.
In conclusion, Canada remains committed to helping achieve the WHO goal of vaccinating 70% of the world's population.
Pandemic. By complementing this with targeted country-specific support, Canada will continue to take a leading role in helping ensure that all countries have access to the COVID-19 tools and support they require. Thank you, Chair.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Tabar, pour vos remarques d'ouverture.
Thank you for your opening remarks. We'll now
6-minute allocations, and leading us off this morning will be Mr. Abdeltaif. Please go ahead for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to everyone. Good morning to the witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Tabar, for your presentation this morning. The first question comes to mind is what is meant by equivalent doses of vaccine to COVAX? Mr. Tabar?
Yes, thank you. I'll proceed, Mr. Chair.
Please go ahead, yes.
Thank you. Much of the funding that Canada has provided to the COVAX facility is for the procurement of vaccines by COVAX. COVAX purchases the vaccines and allocates them through the WHO allocation mechanism to countries in need. As such, the 87 million doses that we have procured the equivalent of is based on a calculation used by all G7 countries to determine the equivalent dose volume that their financial contribution would provide. And so Canada is calculating both the in-kind surplus doses provided to COVAX for allocation, as well as the equivalent, the number of doses that COVAX itself will be able to procure directly from manufacturer through the financial support provided.
Well, thank you. Is there any cash involved in that?
Yes, sir. That is through grant funding to the COVAX facility partners. And as such, we work with trusted international assistance partners like the Gavi, Global Alliance for Vaccines, and they work with other partners to procure doses through the grant funding provided by Canada, other G7 donors, and other financial supporters as well.
How much was Canada's participation as far as dollars in this initiative?
To date, Canada has provided $540 million to the COVAX facility.
But on the specifics of the equivalent, such as the one you've mentioned, would you be specific out of the $580 million, how much that just for the specific initiative?
Yeah, and so the G7 methodology agreed with COVAX takes the total support provided by a donor to COVAX in terms of unrestricted grant support for COVAX's work, and then calculates the dose equivalency based on that. And so for Canada, that $554 million of grant support translates to the equivalent of 87 million doses procured and distributed by COVAX. Okay, so getting from 14 million to 200 million doses by the end of the year, as you mentioned, sounds challenging. It's a big jump from 14 to 200. So if that is cash, isn't that just the Canadian government abdicating on its commitments to donate vaccines? Canada works closely with COVAX to ensure that COVAX receives the support it requires to partner with developing countries and others to meet their vaccine needs. We're already just over 100 million doses provided against that commitment of 200, some from the cash procurement that I mentioned and some from in-kind doses. And we feel we're on track to achieve the target of mobilizing the equivalent of 200 million doses through COVAX by the end of 2022. So in that regard, what has happened to all the vaccines that doses that the government claimed to have contracted for? What happened to that? I'm sorry, sir, I'm not well positioned to speak about Canada's overall procurement, but when doses are made available for donation, we offer them to COVAX, and COVAX uses its allocation framework to place them where they are most needed around the world. Well, Ambassador de Boer would like to participate in answering this question.
Well, thank you for the question, but I have no knowledge of Canada's procurement policies with respect to vaccine procurement within Canada. I'm sorry, I cannot answer that question.
Well, thank you. So COVID-19 vaccines are available through COVAX. Would you be able to tell us what kind of vaccines is available, what the brand names are available, and how many of each has been administered?
Yes, thank you. An excellent question, but quite a detailed one. That information is publicly available on COVAX's website. I would be happy to make sure that there's follow-up for that. At a general level, I can say that COVAX is only in position to procure vaccines that have received the World Health Organization's emergency use listing, and they strive to have a balanced portfolio that reflects the needs of its members. As you would understand, going forward, that will include a large percentage of mRNA vaccines like Pfizer and Moderna, both vaccines within the COVAX portfolio. They are also planning to deliver significant volumes of Novavax and Johnson & Johnson as other prominent vaccines. Initially, AstraZeneca was a prominent vaccine distributed through the COVAX facility, but there has been reduced demand for that viral vector vaccine from partner countries, and so it'll feature less prominently going forward.
I've got 30 seconds left. I have a final question. Is there a problem with countries donating about to expire doses to COVAX, and how many are wasted and they could not get to use before the expiration? Again, any idea on that? And if you can, of course, give me the answer now, would appreciate a written response somehow to the committee.
And just a brief answer, please, in the interest of time.
At this stage, we don't have any detailed or granular information about doses going to waste. I can assure you that no countries receive doses from COVAX that they have not agreed to take. No doses shipped through COVAX that have not been explicitly requested and signed off by any recipient country.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aboultaïf. Mr. Assassi, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Taba, for your explanations. Very, very helpful indeed. My first question is a general one. As you know full well, COVAX is a creation without precedent that came together given the collaboration of numerous countries and the WHO. However, many have criticized it for having been too ambitious, and they say so without knowing all the challenges that were bound to arise. How would you evaluate the implementation of COVAX?
It is a monumental undertaking to have designed a new multilateral mechanism for the procurement and delivery of vaccines. And I would point to a few specific milestones that give us comfort and confidence in how effective the mechanism has been. First, the COVAX mechanism was able to deliver its first doses to Ghana in February 2021, mere weeks after those doses received initial regulatory approval from the WHO. It represents the first time that a novel product in the vaccine space like this was made available so early in an equitable way around the world. Another significant milestone was achieving 1 billion doses delivered, which happened earlier this year. It just, I think for many of us, was a key moment to recognize the enormity of not just the effort, but also the result and progress that COVID has made. At this stage, with over 1.3 billion doses shipped and many more in planning for deliveries in the coming weeks and months, we feel that COVAX is the key platform positioned to provide support to countries that require it. And it offers end-to-end integrated support that includes technical assistance, planning support, cold chain assistance, and local administration and rollout support. As such, when we set out to build this new mechanism with a number of other allies, it was important not just to position COVAX for effective procurement, but to be able to procure safe and effective vaccines that would respond to what countries require, and then to complement that with comprehensive support to strengthen immunization systems in countries. I mentioned in my opening remarks that there were delays last summer and last spring that the world faced. Production was not able to keep pace with the demand that spiked around the world. By about October or November, though, COVAX was well positioned to meet those needs of countries, and it achieved a milestone of over 350 million doses delivered in December alone.
So the latest data suggests that approximately 63% of the population of the world has received one dose. I noted during your presentation that you were talking about the milestone of 70% immunization by the end of the year. How likely is it that the WHO will hit that target by the end of this year? It would appear to me that we may very well surpass that target.
There's a great deal of analysis and multiple opinions on this question. It's one the committee is likely to return to. Personally, I do think that the world is on track for an average immunization level of around 70% or even exceeding it by the end of 2022. I will note, however, that the WHO's goal is that every country achieve immunization levels of 70%, and ideally doing so by this summer. That is a much more ambitious goal, and I do think that there are multiple countries, in particular fragile and conflict-affected states, that will struggle to achieve that level of immunization on that timeline.
Thank you. Now, if I could turn to Ambassador DeBoer. Hello, Ambassador. Great to see you before this committee. I wanted to ask you about the meetings and the discussions that were taking place at the WTO earlier this month. Of course, various initiatives are on the table. There's one that is led by India and South Africa, and another one which is being led by the European Union. I was wondering if you could tell us what Canada's perspective and views are on the merits of the two initiatives that are currently under discussion.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think what you're referring to is there are two two processes. There is a proposal that was put forward by a number of countries, led by India and South Africa. That was presented to the TRIPS Council quite a while ago, actually. I believe in October of 2010, and it's been an ongoing discussion. The other process that you're referring to is one that is led by the Director General of the WTO. It's the so-called quadrilateral process, and that includes the US, the European Union, South Africa, and India. And that's a process that was launched in December and is ongoing.
So these two processes would not be either or. They essentially would complement each other.
It's not clear. There are stories that there is a compromise that has now been reached, but that compromise has not been approved by the quadrilateral. My assumption is that if a compromise was reached, that would go to the TRIPS Council for discussion rather than the earlier proposal, and that members would engage on that particular text.
Merci. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Sassi. Monsieur Bergeron, bonjour. Et la parole à vous pour...
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Bergeron. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. I'm happy to see all of you back after a 2-week parliamentary break that may have seemed long for some people and short for others. Mr. Tabbah, in the opening statement, said something that surprised me. He said that in 2021, it was a year that was marked by a lack of supply, and that in 2022, we were moving towards a situation that would be demand-constrained. Now, that statement surprised me because when we take a look at the situation in a number of countries, including Haiti, for example, and I'll come back to that example in a few moments, we can see that only 1% of the population is vaccinated there. In the Congo, less than 1%. The same thing for Chad. New Guinea, 2.8%. Yemen, 2.4% fully vaccinated. So if we're moving towards a dynamic where there will be constrained demand, well, that's not what we're seeing in certain countries in Africa and in Haiti, for example. So where does this vision come from? Where is this optimistic vision coming from for 2022 that Mr. Tabbah talked about?
C'est une excellente question.
Well, thank you. That's an excellent question. It's not necessarily optimistic. It's a rather difficult challenge. The doses are available. So if Haiti wants a supply of COVAX doses, within a few weeks, the doses could be delivered. The vaccination levels are not because of a lack of supply, but a lack of demand and capacity of their health systems in those specific countries. So the doses are available. There are some $5 billion doses available this year. The necessary work that needs to be done today is to work with those countries, not just to ensure that the political side is there, that the technical aspects are in place, but also that the people in those countries want to be vaccinated against COVID-19. There is some important information required. There's a lack of data in some areas, and so that's why we're working with partners such as the WHO and the PAHO to ensure that the governments in the Dominican Republic, for example, Haiti, have access to a comprehensive assistance package, if you will, so that when demand increases, they can actually have access to the doses, and the capacity and capability will be in place to deliver them. Well, I understand what Mr. Tabbah is saying is that the next challenge is not then with respect to producing and distributing the doses. But the challenge is with respect to delivering them on the ground and administering them to the various populations. So work needs to be done in that regard by Canada, I assume. Now, let's go back and look at what Canada has done. On a bilateral basis, Canada gave doses to several countries through a mechanism that hasn't been fully explained. We haven't fully understood the criteria that were used to determine which countries would receive doses from Canada and which ones did not. Doses coming directly from Canada. Directly through COVAX, Canada provided 4 times as many doses to Jamaica, but none directly to Haiti, for example, which is one of the poorest countries on Earth and which is grappling with a very serious political crisis, a humanitarian crisis that was caused by the natural disaster in the north. And then there are the other issues that are involved. But what explains this disparity with respect to the bilateral distribution of doses of vaccine by Canada to these countries? Thank you for the question. Our offer to the Haitian people, to the government, was clear. We are pursuing it carefully, and we are prepared to work with the Haitian government with respect to doses to be administered. We're here to help our neighbors in the Caribbean, our close neighbors. We need to ensure that Haiti has the ability to increase its participation in this vaccination campaign. And if I can go back, we have some criteria. There are some criteria, and sometimes under COVAX, countries can't receive COVAX donations. So we have mechanisms that enable us to work directly with countries to administer doses. And that is why we worked with Jamaica last year. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron.
Pass the floor to Ms. McPherson. Please go ahead for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank our guests for joining us today. This is obviously an issue that's very important to me. I brought forward the motion for us to study this in this committee, and so I'm looking forward to asking some questions today. And welcome back to all of my colleagues from our weeks in our constituency. The first questions I want to ask about are regarding the TRIPS waiver. So it has recently emerged that a compromise agreement was negotiated. We talked about that earlier. We heard about that earlier. And it would soon be presented to the WTO. So in most CSOs' views, the document is only a small step forward, as it applies only to small geographical areas and addresses the export of vaccines made under compulsory license. Will Canada support the TRIPS waiver at the WTO? Why has Canada been dragging its feet on the original waiver? Is there any action ready to be taken on this reintroduced waiver? And really, one of my big concerns that I guess I should flag is the idea that this is so urgent, and we have heard time and time again that the government is thinking about it, questioning it, looking at it, but we haven't seen the urgency. So when Mr. Taba talks about the idea that we had a very big problem in terms of supply at the beginning of the pandemic, my question is, will we be supporting that going forward, and why didn't we support this in a more expedited way?
Well, thank you for the question. I want to be very clear. There is no TRIPS waiver at this point. There was a proposal, as I mentioned to Mr. Assassi. There is now a process by which...
Sorry to interrupt, but just the one that is coming forward, the quad that is coming forward, does Canada intend to support that? And I do apologize for interrupting you. It's just I have such little time.
Yeah, fair enough. What I would say is that that is not an official waiver text either. We don't have that text. What has happened, as we understand it, is that a compromise was reached amongst the four, and they have gone back to Capitol to consult. The text has not been shared by the quadrilateral members to Canada or to any WTO members, nor has it been shared by the DG. The plan, I understand the plan would be that if they agree, it would be presented to the TRIPS Council as soon as possible. But we do not have access to this particular text. So as it stands right now, there is no waiver text. As with respect to your other question, Canada has never said that we would oppose a TRIPS waiver, but it's been problematic in that there has not been a TRIPS waiver text. And Canada has said that we are ready to engage with members on the basis of a compromise or a compromise text. And in this case, it will have to be when that text is available and when the quadrilateral group has confirmed that that is the compromise. And I should also
you do know the intention of the text, though. Would Canada be finally willing to support the intention of a TRIPS waiver?
I'm not sure why I would know the intention when this text has not been confirmed by the four quadrilateral members.
I'm going to ask another question, sorry to keep moving,
Sure.
but so one of the other questions that I have around is CAMR, the Canadian Access to Medicines Regimes. So we know that there was a proposal put forward from a manufacturer in Bolivia. We've heard a number of concerns about the process to access the CAMR. How is the government addressing this? As it stands, of course, CAMR isn't working. We'd like to see it work better. Is this a priority for the government?
I'm not sure who you drew.
I'm happy to start on that, Ambassador. So with respect to the questions of the Canadian Access to Medicines regime, there is a process, as you outlined, that needs to be followed through to be able to move it through. So at this stage, Canada continues to work in the international fora with respect to this. And follow those dialogues and discussions. And at this stage, has not received a formal proposal through the CAMR process and is looking at the possibilities of how they engage with the regime would be engaged in this regard.
Wouldn't that indicate that the CAMR process is broken if they are not able to actually put that process in forward? And I understand you're saying that there is a process that needs to be undertaken, but it does seem like we are now 2 years into a pandemic and that process should probably be expedited.
I mean, I think it's very important to come back to the comments that were made from my colleagues in Geneva with respect to the fact that right now, actually, the problem is not one of supply. CAMR is a process by which additional supply can be brought to bear from a Canadian perspective in those countries that potentially have need. It is worth noting that would need to be a demonstrable capacity to actually move that through. And as we saw, there was a significant effort from the players at the forefront of the vaccine effort to be able to tech transfer and grow capacity, which ultimately then came to bear, which is why we are now in a position where there is actually significant supply across the world.
Ms. McPherson, thanks very much. That's 6 minutes spot on. You'll have a chance to follow up in subsequent rounds. We will now go to round two, and leading us off will be Mr. Morantz, please, with 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I'm curious about is a recent news story that said that it's very likely that the WHO won't approve Medicago's COVID vaccine due to ties to the tobacco industry. So as you're probably aware, the Government of Canada invested $173 million taxpayers' dollars into Medicago for the production of the, I think it's the Covifenz vaccine. When they applied to the WHO for approval, the WHO did its due diligence and found out that Philip Morris, the tobacco company, owns roughly a 20% stake in Medicago, and that they have a strict policy of not partnering with tobacco companies. I'm wondering, firstly, whether or not you're aware of this situation and what due diligence was done before the government parted with $173 million for a vaccine company whose vaccines can't be used outside of our borders.
Go ahead, Mr. Patterson. I can come back on the WHO side if necessary.
Sure. So with respect to the investments made in the facility in Quebec for Medicago, as with all projects that are ultimately supported through our colleagues at the Strategic Innovation Fund within the Department of Industry or ISED, rigorous due diligence is performed, as well as expert advice in the context of vaccine and biomanufacturing projects through the Vaccine Task Force, who provides advice on all projects moving forward. So there was a process followed and a decision made to fund in accordance with the policies and procedures that are followed for all investments.
Okay, thank you. During that due diligence, did the government of Canada look into the ownership of Medicago? Was it aware prior to the giving of the $173 million grant that Medicago was substantially owned by a tobacco company?
I can't comment on the specific due diligence, having not been part of it, other than to say that financial due diligence is conducted, as well as corporate due diligence on all transactions that are supported through the SIF.
Yeah. Who could answer that question?
I can take that back, sir, and report back if that's.
I would like to know whether or not the government of Canada was aware before it issued $173 million taxpayers' dollars to Medicago that the WHO had a rule that it wouldn't deal with tobacco companies. So if you could respond to that question in writing, I would really appreciate it. My next question is, given this rejection of the Covifense vaccine by the WHO, the article goes on to say that these vaccines will be excluded from contribution to COVAX. So will that hamper the Canadian government's ability to meet its obligations to supply the 200 million doses, equivalents or actual doses, to COVAX? Was it relying on the vaccines from Medicago to meet that goal?
Thank you for the question. I can take that one. No, Canada has not been relying on that specific vaccine candidate to meet the target of donating at least 200 million, the equivalent of 200 million vaccines to COVAX by the end of 2022. As I mentioned, a key necessary step for COVAX to add a vaccine to its portfolio is WHO EUL recognition, which, as you've noted, is likely not to be the case for Medicago. I would simply add, though, that countries are free to make whatever procurement and regulatory decisions they deem appropriate. And so the WHO's emergency use listing is an important step for COVAX, but other countries globally have their own regulator approaches and may make similar decisions to Canada in terms of providing regulatory approval for a vaccine candidate.
Have you had any discussions with any other countries that may simply wish to ignore the WHO rejection and actually acquire vaccines on a bilateral basis?
I would say we have regular discussions with countries, and many countries, including, for example, the United States, Mexico, or others, rely primarily on their own national regulator, as opposed to decisions from the World Health Organization. But the World Health Organization's regulatory function is an important scientific and evidence base, in particular for developing countries that lack stringent regulator authority themselves.
You found out
Thanks
that...
very much. We'll have to, in the interest of time, we'll have to leave it there. You'll have a chance to follow up in a subsequent round. Madame Bendayan, s'il vous plaît, pour 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ambassador, and to all of the witnesses that are here before us today. I would like to begin, however, by acknowledging where we are at Russia issued an ultimatum to surrender the city of Mariupol, and approximately 12 hours ago, Ukraine time, that deadline expired. The citizens of Mariupol continue to be bombed, continue to be shelled, continue to die, and they do so in the name of freedom, and they do so in the name of democracy, and I think we should acknowledge that at the beginning of our meeting. I would also like to acknowledge the leadership of my colleague, Ali El-Hassi, who returned only a few days ago from the Ukraine-Poland border. Mr. Ambassador, I'm very familiar with the discussions around the TRIPS waiver that you referred to earlier in your exchange with my colleague, Ms. McPherson. And I would just like to come back to that for a moment. My understanding is that the United States, India, South Africa, and the European Union, have held discussions, as you mentioned last week, and that there is no proposed text before WTO members, which includes Canada. Is that the current state of affairs as you see it, Ambassador?
Yes, that is correct.
A text, it is impossible for members, including Canada, to provide a clear position one way or the other?
Yes, but I would say this, that Canada has signaled all along that we are ready to join a consensus on the waiver issue. So we will actively engage in discussion, should a text come forward, for example, with a view to reaching a compromise and reaching a solution on this issue.
In fact, Mr. Ambassador, Canada has played a leadership role in bringing parties together on this very topic. Can you perhaps walk us through what Canada has done over the last many months in order to advance discussions on an IP waiver?
Well, thank you very much. What Canada did was mostly through the work of the Ottawa Group that Canada has convened within the WTO. And much of the Ottawa Group's work was animated by the DG and a process that she engaged in called the Third Way, where she looked at some of the impediments to some of the trade impediments with respect to our response to COVID and COVID-19. And so what Canada has been doing with the Ottawa Group members is put forward a trade and health initiative that would facilitate trade in and the equitable distribution of medical goods, including vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics, and vaccine production inputs, and generally promote resilient and predictable supply chains. And we have been working hard to try to get support within the WTO for this initiative. So it would address export restrictions, promote efficient customs procedures, temporarily remove or reduce tariffs on these medical goods, and production inputs.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. And to be clear, just as you said, our government absolutely welcomes the progress that was made, and we have always been in search for a multilateral solution to this issue. But picking up on your last answer, you mentioned other medical goods. And my understanding is that in addition to vaccines, we also need to provide developing countries with syringes and other medical items in order to support their vaccination campaigns. Can you perhaps speak to Canada's role in providing those additional materials?
So I'm working here in the trade policy sphere, not in the procurement of goods such as syringes. But let me tell you that, and perhaps all of you, honorable members, will recall this as well. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had issues as significant as trying to get masks, for example. And so what the Ottawa Group response and the Trade and Health Initiative's response is to try to address some of those problems, trying to address export restrictions, increase transparency so it's easier to facilitate the international trade in those vital, but sometimes very simple goods.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Bendayan. We'll have to leave it there. Maintenant, je passe la parole à Monsieur Bergeron, s'il vous plaît, pour...
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Bergeron. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to go back to a question that was put with respect to Medicago. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this was a preliminary indication from the WHO and not a final decision. And I'd like to know what representations Canada is undertaking at the WHO to deal with this decision, which at first sight may seem logical because tobacco companies do not produce something that's necessarily good for one's health. But how can we prevent a cigarette company from making a major investment in something that will, in fact, be extremely beneficial for the health of people across the globe?
Je peux peut-être nous.
I could perhaps start with an answer, and if other colleagues have something to add, they could continue. Health Canada determined that the Medicago vaccine is safe and effective, and that is why domestically we made the decision that we did. It's an important vaccine for the world. The decision was very recent. The discussions with the WHO continue.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres
Anyone else want to comment on that question?
que, d'après votre évaluation des...
Well, based on your assessment of the situation, could we be hopeful to see a decision that isn't a negative one coming from the WHO? I apologize, but I'm not in a good position to give you an answer or a prediction on an issue like that. That is a different issue. Well, thank you. I understand that. I know that I don't have very much time left. I think it wouldn't be good to try to put forth another question with such a short amount of time left, so I'll come back on the next round. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, thank you, Mr. Bergeron.
Please, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question I have actually is around COVAX and the understanding that COVAX was intended to be used as a tool to make sure vaccines were equitably distributed. Do you believe that, maybe Mr. Tabaha, do you believe that it undermines COVAX's ability to do its job when other countries develop bilateral agreements with the vaccine producers and, in effect, take the vaccines that would be available so COVAX can't do its job?
I think COVAX's plan for procurement was sound. There were delays and export restrictions from key suppliers that created a significant gap in its procurement pipeline early last year, and that really is spring and early summer. I think
Was that gap available, though, because other countries like Canada made bilateral agreements to actually take those doses, so there weren't doses available?
That's not the analysis that we have discussed with COVAX or with other partners, and it really was a significant reliance on production from the Serum Institute of India, and then a very significant third wave that affected that country that led to export restrictions. I do think, though, it is worth stepping back a little bit and recognizing that since the fall, COVAX has had access to the supply that it required, and as such has been able to ensure it can play the part that we hoped it would for developing countries and other members.
Do you think that it's appropriate? I guess, I look at some of the profits that we're expecting that Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna will be making over the course of this pandemic. We've heard estimates in the range of around $65,000 a minute. And I'm just wondering if and considering that $8 billion of public dollars went into the delivery or to the development of vaccines, do you think that it is appropriate the pharmaceutical companies are in fact in charge of the disbursement of life-saving vaccines?
I'll take that one from the honourable member, and all I can say is we are trying to ensure that COVAX has everything it needs to respond to the end-to-end requirements of developing country partners to reach those immunization targets. Thank
that
you.
we're in a good situation if there is another pandemic to be able to get vaccines out more equitably? I think we can all agree that the vaccine response to COVID-19 was not strong. Would you feel that we are in a well-placed or better-placed situation for future pandemics?
Just a very brief answer, please.
On the one hand, we've now developed mechanisms that we won't have to put in place from scratch next time, but there remain very significant reforms to the international architecture that multiple independent panels have called for. And I think there is still work ahead of the global community to put in place some of those changes to ensure something like this never happens again.
Thank you.
We'll have to leave it there. Thanks very much, Ms. McPherson. Mr. Chung, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify a couple of several pieces of information. So, as I understand it, the Government of Canada signed contracts directly with vaccine manufacturers to provide vaccines to Canadians for over 400 million doses. I understand that about 90% of adult Canadians are vaccinated with 3 doses, I believe. So that means we've used approximately 90 million doses, which means that we have around over 300 million doses left under contract that are available to Canadians. I think Canada pledged 200 million doses to the COVAX facility as part of our commitment to it. And in the earlier testimony today, I think you mentioned, the witnesses mentioned, Mr. Chair, that Canada has donated $540 million to date to this program, this COVAX facility, which is the equivalent of 87 million doses. So that's my understanding of what we've been told here. So just to clarify, is the 87 million dose equivalent that you are seeing this $540 million grant as, is that entirely made up of, are there any actual vaccine doses in the 87 million dose equivalent amount? That's the first question I have.
Thank you. And yes, that's the number of doses that we have agreed with COVAX and as G7 members.
I'm asking a very specific question. The 87 million dose equivalent, are there actual doses in there that Canada has contributed, or is that all an equivalent amount?
Yes, thank you. I understand now. So that is the equivalent amount from the cash contribution. Over and above that, Canada has provided in-kind doses, approximately 15 million, that have been delivered through COVAX to developing countries.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So that works out to roughly, just as a rough back of the napkin calculation, to about $6.20 a dose Canadian. In other words, the $540 million that Canada has contributed to the COVAX facility is roughly 87 million dose equivalents, which is roughly $6.20. Is that accurate math here?
Correct. There might be a cent or two difference, and it was based on a U.S. equivalency, but yes.
Okay, so the working group for the OECD proposed valuating these dose equivalents at $6.72 US, which is $8.40 Canadian on the current exchange rate of roughly 80 US cents per Canadian dollar. So I take it that the G7 equivalency is different than the OECD working group equivalency. Is that correct?
And sometimes, honourable member, I wish it wasn't. This was a G7 methodology put in place under UK leadership last June, and you're right, the discussions at OECD are ongoing about that new one. They're in the same ballpark, but there are differences, and we're trying to streamline that.
So the other question I have is, this $540 million that we have contributed, will Canada be considering that as part of its annual official development assistance goals? Will that be included in the ODA calculations for this year, for last year, this year, and upcoming years?
That's where that OECD valuation is really important, because any in-kind support provided directly to developing countries, like these dose donations, will be reported as official development assistance. Now, we may donate doses through COVAX that go to middle-income countries, and so we'll have to look at whether those are also reported. But certainly all those to low-income and low-middle-income countries will be reported as such.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chong, thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Gahir, welcome back to the committee. And 5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the ambassador and to the witnesses for making time. My first question is about COVAX and the fair allocation framework. So the criteria is equality of coverage. That's a primary criteria. Could the panelists, the witnesses, please speak about how COVAX doses are directed to specific countries, who manages the delivery and the handover to the countries, and who's responsible for the domestic rollout? Sort of, we've had conversations about how COVAX gets the doses, but what happens once they have them?
Thank you. It's an excellent question and something that we're all placing a great deal of attention on right now. In terms of the allocation framework, there is a hands-off independent scientific process led by the WHO to ensure that as soon as doses are made available through COVAX, they are allocated to countries on the basis, yes, of need and coverage, but also ability to use and other criteria like vaccine dose preference. And so if a certain vaccine becomes available, but it's not what a country is looking for, it'll go to someone else. That's part of the algorithm and the calculations that I mentioned that go into each allocation round as new doses become available. The specific partners inside COVAX, Gavi is the organization that leads on the negotiation and determination of which vaccines to procure. But then UNICEF is the logistics agent that in general manages the delivery of vaccines from manufacturer to country. In country, the doses are traditionally handed over to the domestic health authority, the Minister of Health and her team, for example, and they then take responsibility and are responsible then for national rollout and administration. They have support from Gavi, from UNICEF, and from the WHO in managing those national vaccines, but ultimately the international community is here to support national authorities in managing their immunization campaigns.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Taba. Very informative. I'd like to jump to the TRIPS waiver proposal, which we've spoken about a little bit. So there seems to be significant support amongst WTO members for the India and South Africa-led TRIPS waiver proposal. And several members, though, including the EU, Norway, and the UK, have opposed it. And the UK, on December 16, 2021, issued a statement to the WTO's TRIPS Council and voiced its concerns that the proposed TRIPS waiver would not increase the number of vaccines reaching people's arms and carried risks. So could you speak to why WTO members like the EU, Norway, and the UK are opposed to the South Africa and India-led TRIPS waiver proposal?
Well, that is first of all, you're asking me to divine what the UK is or Norway are thinking, for example. I think those are the two countries you mentioned. But let me say this, there have been criticisms of the waiver proposal because it may not actually achieve the result, which is to increase vaccine production for a variety of reasons. But no WTO member has said that they do not wish to discuss this issue. This goes before the TRIPS Council, which is a council of the WTO. And as this has been discussed, there's a 90-day period for proposals to be discussed. And every time the 90 days has come up, the membership has unanimously agreed to continue those discussions. But I would say that what I hear from the members that you have mentioned is that there is some suggestion that the proposal will not actually address what it is intended to address. But honestly, the best people to ask the answer to that question would be those members themselves.
Great, thank you. So do you then share the UK's pessimism with respect to reaching a consensus based on the TRIPS waiver proposal led by India and South Africa?
It's not at all clear, as I said earlier, that the India and South Africa proposal will continue to be viable, because we have heard that the quadrilateral, the proposal or the discussions with the US, EU, India, and South Africa may have reached another result. And so, and it's too early to tell because we don't know what's in that particular proposal. But I would say this, that Canada is more than willing to engage in that discussion and would support a consensus with the membership going forward.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Grahir. We'll now go into our third round of questions, and leading us off is Mr. Genuis, please, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. What proportion of the vaccines...
No sounds, Chair. We don't hear. Can't hear.
Is that a...
Stand by 1 second, please. I'll put pause on your time. It's a problem with the audio or the interpretation, Mr. Abeltaif?
The audio.
Okay, let's see if we can... I see his microphone is being on. Mr.
Parle
Genuis,
français, si c'est facile, plus facile.
Are we good?
Okay.
Yes?
C'est OK en français, en tout cas.
It's coming through in French, all right.
Go ahead, Mr. Genuis.
Okay. Thank you. What proportion of the vaccines that Canada is giving away or contributing through COVAX are of a type that is not recommended in Canada?
Thank you for the question. None of them are. We would only offer through COVAX vaccines that we had procured, and that meant that they had received regulatory approval from Health Canada and also regulatory approval from the World Health Organization.
So my question was not what proportion had not received regulatory approval. My question was what proportion that are not recommended in Canada. For example, I understand that AstraZeneca is approved, but not recommended for use by Canadians.
Yeah, and there would be other people better placed to speak about Canada's domestic strategy. We have made AstraZeneca doses available through COVAX for donation. It is a dose that continues to be sought by some countries around the world, and we have recent information from COVAX that AstraZeneca has been allocated to countries that continue to use it as part of their national campaign.
Thank you. So could you answer my first question?
On the proportion?
What proportion of Canada's COVAX contribution funds or distributes doses that are not recommended for use in Canada? That was my initial question.
I can say that of the roughly 15 million doses that Canada has provided in kind, about 5 million have been Moderna and about 10 million have been AstraZeneca. The dose equivalents that COVAX has purchased and allocated from our financial contributions, I don't have attributed down to specific vaccine types.
Okay, thank you. So of the in-kind vaccine contributions, 2/3 of what we're giving to other countries are of a vaccine type not recommended for use in Canada. Do you have concerns about how that might be perceived?
I don't have any concerns. The AstraZeneca doses were the first vaccines that Canada donated to the facility and were made available from the manufacturer. It's natural that more of those were allocated initially. We now see that.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but just limited time here. I want to ask what proportion of the total vaccines distributed by the COVAX facility are of a type not recommended for use in Canada?
An earlier question touched on the overall volume by name and delivery by COVAX. That information is publicly available. I don't have it at my fingertips, but I'm happy to make sure the committee has line of sight on all the vaccines allocated.
Thank you.
No vaccines allocated.
If you could provide it to us in writing. Do you know offhand? My sense is that about 20% of the vaccines shipped through COVAX are Sinopharm or Sinovac from China, and those are not approved for distribution in Canada. Is that correct?
Both of those received EUL and were available from COVAX. I understand demand was low, and so I can't confirm that that's the overall volume that was shipped, but that will be part of the information we will share.
Okay. I've got about a minute left, Mr. Chair. Or?
A bit more than that, actually. A minute and 10.
Okay, excellent. I wonder if you can comment on the use of so-called vaccine diplomacy by China, your observations around that, and the impact of that. There's some indication that distribution of vaccines is being used as a strategic tool by the government of China to, for instance, try to blunt human rights criticism. Is this a phenomenon you're observing, and what is Canada doing to respond?
Canada, like other G7 countries, is committed to ensure that there's an effective multilateral mechanism so that countries have a choice when they're looking for a safe and effective vaccine, and COVAX is now providing that.
I don't know that was really an answer to my question. Are you observing the use of vaccine diplomacy as a kind of a geostrategic tool by the government of China to blunt criticism around its human rights record? I understand your objective is to give countries a choice, but are you seeing efforts being made along those lines?
And just a brief answer, please.
I think multiple countries attempted to pair vaccine offers with a desire for influence earlier in the pandemic when supply was scarce. Now that supply is abundant, we hope countries will continue to choose safe and effective vaccines, and that's what COVAX offers.
Mr. Genuis, thank you very much. Mr. Sarai, please, for 5 minutes.
If you could elaborate some of the concerns of why, say, the TRIPS waiver would not be an effective tool to actually increase supply and affordable supply for those countries seeking it. Sometimes people think it's a very simplistic way to increase supply for developing countries and continents that have a challenge, and others don't realize why. Maybe you can elaborate the challenges that have been discussed.
With all due respect, please be aware that some of this is surmising since I am not an intellectual property expert, but the issue seems to be around one with respect to timing and particularly around the timing of the production of these vaccines. I mentioned earlier that the Director General of the WTO had a third way proposal where she talked to industry about the issues that they were facing with respect to vaccine production. None of them mentioned intellectual property as the problem. They talked about other issues like inputs, for example. Actually having the technical expertise and the people that could deliver on the manufacturing, particularly on mRNA, which is quite complex, and supply chain predictability was another issue. And so some of the countries that are holding the IP, I would imagine, are thinking we should probably be spending more time addressing those issues that have been identified as the real stumbling blocks to vaccine production. So there's a range of issues not related to the IP itself.
And is Canada's strategy to, and forgive me if it's because I wasn't here earlier, to increase doses to those countries needing it through funding COVAX, or is it also to use some of our domestic facilities that now have been created or being created that may create supply right here in Canada to help supply those countries?
Thank you for the question. I can take that one. I would say it's a multi-pronged approach whereby our support to COVAX is the primary mechanism to help end the acute phase of the pandemic right now. And that's through both cash financing, through grant agreements, and also through the provision of in-kind doses that are donated from Canadian surplus. In addition, though, we are supporting more diversified manufacturing capacity, including in South Africa, with an mRNA hub. As the ambassador mentioned, developing the capacity and infrastructure to produce mRNAs is highly complex. And this is a COVAX-backed initiative with WHO as a key partner to work with a consortium of producers in South Africa to ensure that that becomes the initial South African capacity for that production. And then going forward, as Canada brings additional manufacturing capacity online through its biomanufacturing strategy, I think there is an expectation and a hope that that could play a role in addressing global vaccine demands.
And how is the global world, either through COVAX or otherwise, quickly dealing with vaccine hesitancy in the developing world?
Our understanding is that the situation differs significantly from country to country, and so the responses that we are trying to support differ as well. We're working hand in hand with ministries of health and the World Health Organization to put in place vaccine confidence campaigns. Sometimes that's because populations didn't have access to clear information. Sometimes it's simply because they didn't have access to health services to receive the immunization. And so I was in Nigeria a few weeks ago speaking with the Minister of Health about additional support that we could provide to ensure that populations in remote areas receive not only access, but clear and up-to-date information about the benefits of taking a COVID-19 vaccine. So there is work happening on multiple fronts at a country level, a regional level, and also a global level to focus on demand generation, because that will be critical in achieving 70% immunization levels this year.
Thank you.
Mr. Sarai, thank you very much. Just before we go to our next intervention, I just want to remind colleagues of the Board of Internal Economy Health Guidelines. If you're not speaking or having lunch, please continue to wear masks as set out by the Board of Internal Economy. Puis, Monsieur Bergeron, la parole est à vous maintenant pour 2 minutes.
Mr. Bergeron, you've got 2.5 minutes. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like some clarification. In one of the comments between Mr. Tabat and Mr. Chong, he said that Canada's financial contribution would be interpreted with a vaccine equivalent. Now, does that mean that the financial contributions under COVAX are transformed into the purchase of doses, and that there's none of that amount or none of those that are used to respond to the new challenges with respect to the distribution administration in the countries receiving the vaccines? That's an excellent question. We're doing our best to make a distinction between the various funds that are available under COVAX. COVAX works not only on the purchasing of doses and the delivery of those doses, but it also provides assistance, technical assistance for countries as required. So the equivalence is something that we are discussing with the G7 and with the OECD as well to ensure that there is a consistent approach. But the 170 million doses, and that is the amount that was purchased by Canada. So we have support in place with the WHO, with UNICEF and other partners to support the delivery and administration of doses, and that's not included in the calculation. Well, 2 things about that very interesting answer. First of all, have any steps been taken under COVAX? Because, as you said earlier, the doses are available under the initiative, but the problem is a problem with the receiving and delivery and administration of those doses. So have any steps been taken to change or transform the action so that there's better delivery on the ground? And secondly, how much Canadian aid will be used to deal with the new challenge that you identified? A brief answer, please. We are in regular contact and conversation with COVAX, not on a weekly basis, but on a daily basis, and also with our partner countries where we'd like to see an increase in vaccination and use of the doses. So it's a challenge that we take very seriously, and we're ensuring that COVAX can play a more significant role regionally and a country basis in the weeks and months to come. Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, could I ask Mr. Tabat to come back with a written answer with respect to the amounts that Canada has provided to ensure the distribution and administration of doses in the recipient countries? Yes, we've made note. Ms. McPherson, please proceed.
Speaking of written documentation, I'm just wondering whether or not it would be possible for our witnesses to provide a list of all government meetings with the pharmaceutical lobby and related companies since the beginning of the pandemic, including notes from those meetings if possible. My question is going to follow up on my colleague, Mr. Bergeron's questions on ODA. My concern is that if ODA is being calculated using vaccines as part of our overseas development or official development assistance, that we will not see the same levels in other areas. Will there be an impact if we do calculate these as part of our ODA? Will there be an impact on other areas where ODA is vitally important as we recover from COVID-19? Perhaps you could take that one.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you. To date, all the support that we have provided to COVAX in terms of financial support, as well as the support provided more broadly to the ACT Accelerator for test, treat, and health systems has been additional to Canada's regular ODA budget. These are extraordinary COVID-19 funds that the government has made available to support this initiative, and as such should be viewed as additional and not substituting. It is essential to maintain our current health services for populations in need, in particular during the pandemic.
Just to clarify, going forward into the next year's budget and into future budgets, we would expect to see that ODA would still remain, we would still have those contributions to things like food security, knowing that the crisis in Ukraine is going to have deep impacts on food security around the world. We would still have the support within our FIAP, within the International Assistance Policy for Women and Girls. All of those things would not be taken from in order to account for the ODA that we've spent on vaccines.
Thank you. It's an excellent question, one I do not have an answer to, but I can speak about what's been done to date, and that is additional funding provided to the department that ensures the integrity of current reference level flows. Thank you.
Very quickly, then I'll just ask as well, you did mention earlier today that $15 million, I believe, had been allocated to funding in South Africa to produce vaccines. We have heard that there would be around $34 billion that was made by pharmaceutical companies over the course of the pandemic. I'm just wondering if you feel $15 million is sufficient to help South Africa get to a situation where they can create vaccines accessible to people around the world.
And just a brief answer, please, sir.
At this point, we're pleased to be the second most important donor to that initiative, and we're hoping that vaccines start rolling out the door next year. And it'll be a really important step for South Africa to be able to produce mRNA vaccines on soil. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. Mr. Abeltaif, please, for 5 minutes.
Well, thanks again, Chair. I go back to my colleague Pete Chong's question over the $540 million to 87 million doses or equivalent to at $6.20 per dose. The question to Mr. Taba, is this price a universal, like the unit cost per vaccine? Do you know?
So these are relatively complicated policy discussions that we've had among G7 countries and now among DAC countries as part of the OECD with COVAX, where we've tried to provide the best estimate of an average cost. We're not privy to the specific dollars paid per dose by COVAX, but we're trying to find a fair representation that would appropriately reflect in a transparent way the costs of procurement of the doses that COVAX has done.
My issue with this is that we could, Canada could have paid more than other countries. We've heard throughout the last 2 years that our unit cost is higher than what European Union or United Kingdom paid. Do you have any idea on that?
Unfortunately, no, but in terms of the valuation, it was important to find a solution that worked for all of us so that there was at least some simplicity and coherence brought into the mechanism. So it's not related to Canada's purchase price, but rather to the equivalent that COVAX is needing to allocate per dose.
So COVAX is negotiating or has negotiated on behalf on all donors or on participant in the fund to provide those vaccinations needed. Is that correct?
Yeah, what makes COVAX special is that it's a pooled procurement mechanism. And so it takes the demand from, say, 92 developing countries and is able to negotiate better prices and access as a result of that, and then bulk procures doses to then allocate to its members.
The 92 countries, those the one that they're going to be benefiting from the COVAX, is that correct?
Yeah, they're part of a window called the Advanced Market Commitment, and it's specifically for low-income and low-middle-income countries, and so the ones that need the most international support.
So we can call this the distribution list of COVAX vaccines. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the members, the participating economies, the AMC 92, and they are the ones where those doses are primarily being allocated to.
Is the information on how the distribution happened, is that information public record, or do we need to obtain it through you?
It's all publicly available on both COVAX's website, but also on UNICEF's, where they have a very good interactive dashboard where you can click on a country to see when shipments from COVAX came into the country. And of course, it summarizes it at higher levels as well.
Does Canada have a preference over how I mean, we sit on that table, I can imagine, since we're a donor country. Do we have an influence how this distributions need to happen, or we're taking the recommendation of the WHO in this case?
Yeah, so we do sit and actively participate in many tables, but the allocation framework is arm's length from donors so that it is entirely needs-based and ensures equity. And so that's run by WHO with scientific experts and clear and algorithms that countries understand. And so no, we do not influence the allocation of COVAX's doses to their member countries, because that's a science and needs-based decision that's run by that arm's length committee.
So we accept the recommendation and we fulfill our commitment accordingly without having to have any influence, I guess, over how vaccines are distributed and where they go and how much to pay per vaccine.
That's right. We understand the parameters. We helped to negotiate and put them in place for this mechanism. We were a key leader of it from the beginning. And so we accept how well the methodology works in terms of allocating the vaccines.
And when we say we accept, who does that? Who does accept? Is it the Minister of Health, Foreign Affairs, who does, or International Development, who does accept that?
And so when we're dealing with in-kind doses, doses that are surplus to Canadian requirements, those are deemed surplus by the Minister of Health of Canada. And then the Minister of International Development delegates to us the delivery of those doses through COVAX to wherever the fair allocation framework that COVAX manages. And so obviously COVAX keeps us informed. We want to ensure that our embassies on the ground are aware of incoming Canadian doses. We want to make sure that we take the advantage to ensure that they are put to use immediately and lead to immunizations in our partner countries. So it's a dynamic discussion, but the allocation process itself is arm's length from donors and other countries like Canada and managed by the WHO on COVAX's behalf.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abeltave. Ms. Vandenbeld, please, for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank you for your expertise and being here today. Just before I get to my questions, I just like a clarification. When Canada is providing doses, we're not just providing the actual vaccine, we're also providing the things that are needed to administer that, like syringes and things like that. Is that correct?
When we work with COVAX, as I mentioned, we're one of only 4 countries to ensure that we pay the full ancillary costs for any donated doses. And so kudos to Ireland and a couple other countries for being partners with us in this. But the intent is that when we donate to COVAX, we can't then create an additional financial burden on COVAX or the others. COVAX has their own agreements to procure the safe disposal materials, the vaccines, and the transport, but we ensure that they have the financing necessary so that Canada's donated doses don't create any additional cost or burden on them.
Thank you. And also, we've talked a lot today about the actual doses, the actual vaccines, and that's the COVAX piece. But we also know that part of the ACT Accelerator, there's 3 other pillars, and that includes things that are really needed by countries, like, for instance, the testing, to be able to test for COVID. So under the therapeutics pillar, we've also got needs for health systems, as we've heard from other members here, the absorption capacity of health systems and the bottlenecks. That's another pillar, and also making sure that there's diagnostics. So, the diagnostics and the testing, and then the therapeutics, which is basically treatment. So it's not just a matter of getting vaccines. We need to be able to treat COVID, need to be able to test for COVID, and need to be able to get those vaccines into people's arms through the healthcare system. So can you tell us a little bit about what Canada is doing on those other 3 pillars, in addition to the actual doses, and where we rank compared to other countries on those 3 pillars?
Thank you. And Chair, you'll have to cut me off because I could speak all day about this. The ACT Accelerator covers all 4 of those pillars because they're essential. That 70% immunization level, if we reach it, still means that there'll be 30% that are not vaccinated. They will rely on test and treat strategies, much as we are increasingly doing in North America, given the continued transmission of vaccines. Test and treat is essential for us to identify the evolution of this virus and then to deal with it, in particular for people more at risk of serious illness. Canada is one of the largest donors to each of those pools. Health systems are necessary both to ensure the delivery of treatments, tests, and also vaccines, but it's also the legacy piece that we hope to strengthen that will persist after this pandemic and position us to better respond to any future threats. The ACT Accelerator took a novel approach by identifying a fair share burden for every country. And so they determined what every country should pay so that the ACT Accelerator could do its work. And Canada was one of the very first countries to fully meet its burden share to the ACT Accelerator, and one of the very few to have done so. And so Canada is held in very high regard for having met its burden share and ensured a balanced approach across all 4 pillars. We're one of the only donors to have done so.
Thank you. And is it true that Canada, on the therapeutics pillar, the diagnostics pillar, and the health systems pillar, are actually first in the world?
And I thank the honourable member for her question. The needle moves around a little bit as new contributions come on, but we are a top donor, and that sometimes is first, but sometimes we bump down to second or third, but then we bring in additional investments are. I would say that the international system and developing country partners are very well aware of Canada's leadership in providing access not just to vaccines, but also to health system support, diagnostic support, and access to therapies. And therapies, in particular, the development of new antivirals, really is the next horizon, where we want to make sure that developing countries do have equal access to them, just as they do for vaccines now. Thank you.
And I'd also like to ask, just on a different track, about the pilot project, the South Africa Technology Manufacturing Hub, the Transfer Hub. This is something that Canada is. You mentioned the $15 million, but can you tell me the importance of it and why this pilot is something that that will be significant in terms of potentially scaling that up in the future?
Thank you. I would point to 2 elements in particular that are significant. South Africa is already a regional leader in vaccine production. They have outstanding manufacturing capacity and have been working on producing generic vaccines, but there has been no mRNA vaccine production capacity in sub-Saharan Africa or in Africa more generally. And so this is the first WHO-backed initiative to ensure that there is Africa production, primarily aimed for African consumption of mRNA vaccine. The second point is that this will be a hub, and it will have a number of spokes across the continent where additional production will happen. So this is where the core of the technology transfer and the scale-up of capability will occur, but that will then be reproduced in other production facilities. So we'll get a much bigger bang for this investment than we would have by investing in competing discrete initiatives. We're very excited. The South Africans are very excited, and so frankly, our other stakeholders across the African continent.
Mr. Taba, thanks Thanks very much. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you, Ms. Vanden Belt. Colleagues, we're at 12:30. I had suggested that we set aside 15 minutes at the end of the meeting to discuss a number of housekeeping items. If it's okay with everybody, I would suggest that we do 4 more interventions, 1 per party of 3 minutes each. That would take us roughly to 1:45. And if you're okay with that, then we would start out with Mr. Morantz for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, Mr. Genuis is going to take my round. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Genuis, please.
Thank you. Just to follow up on my earlier comments and just putting together a few things. So we've been talking a bit about the challenge of vaccine hesitancy and some of the efforts to combat that. That's in a context, bluntly, though, where, as was said, 2/3 of Canada's physical contribution to COVAX have been of a kind of vaccine that's not recommended for use in Canada. And to clarify my comments about Sinopharm and Sinovac, according to Dr. Bruce Aylward with the WHO, Sinopharm and Sinovac's COVID-19 vaccines have been shipped to 49 countries through COVAX, accounting for nearly 20% of total vaccines shipped through COVAX. Do you think that part of the problem of vaccine hesitancy in developing countries is exacerbated by the fact that that vaccines that are known to have lower efficacy than other vaccines or that aren't recommended for use in the country that's sending them, do you think that's contributing to vaccine hesitancy?
Of the data and polling that I've seen, and there has been extensive work done by WHO and UNICEF, as well as African Union and countries themselves, it appears that it was lack of access to vaccines that allowed misinformation to spread more actively. I do expect, though, that the portfolio that we offer through COVAX will continue to evolve and be much more reliant on mRNA vaccines. I wouldn't expect to see a lot more viral vector distributions, just because the demand for those from countries that set their own national immunization goals are shifting away from viral vectors, just as has been the case in Canada.
Sir, as I've maybe said previously, I don't know that that's an answer to my question. You're saying that the delays allowed misinformation to set in, but I'm sharing what is clearly information, not misinformation, and that is that Canada is choosing to distribute vaccines that are not recommended for use in Canada, and that some proportion, and we'll find out when you follow up with a written answer, some proportion of what's coming from other countries may be vaccines that aren't even approved, let alone recommended here in Canada. Is it not logical to wonder that people who are looking at that and saying, hey, people in Canada are being encouraged to choose other alternatives, and yet Canada is sending this to us, that might contribute to hesitancy in terms of uptake, at least until other kinds of vaccines are available?
I respect the decisions that our partner countries are taking about what vaccines to prioritize in their national immunization strategy. If that aligns with viral vectors, including those made available for donation by Canada, so be it. But as we've seen, increasingly, their priorities are also shifting to mRNA. They're following the science much as Canada has.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Genuis, I'm sorry. We'll have to leave it there. Mr. Assassi, please, for 3 minutes.
I'd like to share my time with Ms. Vanden Belt.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'd just like to, with a couple final questions. There was mention earlier in the committee about what a lot of people are talking about as future-proofing the world from future pandemics. Can you talk about how the work that Canada has done in our leadership role in the ACT Accelerator and the COVAX mechanisms as mechanisms, but also the work in terms of transforming health systems, training health professionals, the transportation of vaccines, cold storage, how will that actually have a multiplier effect in terms of the future so that what we're putting in right now is actually going to have impact going forward, not just for future variants, but also for future pandemics?
Yes, thank you. And we've spoken also of production capacity. Diversifying and increasing production capacity is a key element, as is speeding up the sequencing of diseases once we understand that there are new outbreaks so that we can determine vaccine responses much more quickly. The G7 has adopted a goal to try and carry out that genomic sequencing so that we can come up with new vaccine solutions within 100 days of a novel outbreak. That married alongside increased vaccine production capacity means that we will be much better positioned to ensure broad-scale vaccine rollout in the future. But as you've said, these investments we're making in health systems are to strengthen immunization capacity today, but hopefully carrying on in a sustainable way in the future. And that community health worker that is putting shots in arms is also the person at front lines who will be best placed to detect when there are new viral outbreaks, when they see any kind of a disease occurrence that is different from what was to be expected. And by equipping these community health workers at the front line with diagnostic capacity and simple multivariant testing capacity, we will be able to detect much earlier what these novel outbreaks might be. That said, the work isn't done yet. We continue to need to find better ways of managing this, and the World Health Organization is in a leadership role in terms of convening us around a table to see whether there is a need to put in a new international instrument to ensure better data exchange and better management of information at the onset of a pandemic. COVAX and ACT-A are functioning at a really high level right now, but obviously it took a very heavy lift by many of us to develop those mechanisms and put them in place. We now have identified what these effective multilateral mechanisms are and can be, and they will continue to be there should the world require their kind of assistance in the event of another catastrophic novel disease outbreak. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Vandenbelt. Monsieur Bergeron, s'il vous plaît, pour...
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Bergeron for 3 minutes. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back to the supply for some countries since the start of the pandemic. Now, everyone knows that from the outset, we wanted to focus specific attention on Palestine, Taiwan, and Haiti. And that call was not heard by the government because in the case of Taiwan, which had assisted us at the start of the pandemic when we desperately needed medical equipment, including masks and gowns, we received more than 1 million masks from Taiwan at the start of the pandemic. Taiwan was facing challenges, obstacles coming from China, and I had pleaded for us to take some action to provide doses of the vaccine to Taiwan, but Canada hasn't delivered any doses to Taiwan directly or under the COVAX initiative. Japan, Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic have done so. And the same situation occurs for Palestine. It seems to me that we offered them doses that were almost outdated, and Palestine rejected them because of the delivery issues, delivery and administration issues. So how can we explain that we paid such little attention to the needs of those countries that were in specific situations and that would have needed quicker help, quicker bilateral assistance from Canada? Thank you for the question. I apologize, but I'm not in a position to speak to all of these issues across the world. I have colleagues who focus on different regional issues, and they are better placed to answer the question than I am. I wasn't aware that there was a request from Taiwan. Taiwan was exemplary when it came to its domestic response internally, and it's a model to be followed by many countries. In Haiti, well, we discussed the difficulties, the current difficulties. Our support to the people of Haiti is very important. There are repetitive political crises there that have also had an impact on offers from Canada, but also from the international system. A great deal of work remains to be done with our Haitian colleagues, and I hope that we will be able to increase the situation there with respect to delivery and administration. And for Palestine, I apologize, I don't have any up-to-date information on that situation. Well, it would be wonderful, Mr. Thabah, if you could send back some information, additional information in writing on that. It would be greatly appreciated. And I'd like to thank you again for being here with us today. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron.
Thank you. And I have the enviable position of being last in this committee, so I always get to ask the last question. And I want to end with something. I had spoken to a doctor that's been working very hard on this work, Dr. Madhu Pai, who is the professor and Canadian Research Chair of Epidemiology and Global Health. And I asked him what he wanted me to ask the experts today, and he expressed this deep dismay that we are studying vaccine equity right now, that in fact we should be in a situation where vaccine equity is a reality because we are 2 years into this pandemic. He is deeply concerned about the variants, the BA2 variant, the potential for future variants, the potential for impacts on Canadians and people around the world. He has stated very clearly that Canada should have already donated our 200 million doses. We should have already backed the TRIPS waiver, and we should have already ramped up vaccine production. So my final question for this panel is, what has been the biggest impediment to Canada fulfilling its promises? You know, we did promise the 200 million doses. We did not achieve that. We have repeatedly said that we are open to engage on intellectual property, but we have done nothing to waive intellectual property rights, even temporarily. CAMR is still inaccessible. You know, it's 2 years in. Why has Canada shown such limited understanding of the urgency of this issue, the impacts on Canadians, the impacts on people around the world?
Perhaps I can start, and I thank the honourable member for her question. I would note that increasing equity and increasing access by all populations, in particular low and middle income, has been the single overriding focus of my team for the last 2 years. What our partner organizations asked for as the priority was financial support and an improved coordination mechanism to work together. We delivered them the ACT-A, the COVAX facility, and fully met Canada's burden share to ensure that they had the resources necessary. We are on track to achieve the 200 million dose commitment. It is by the end of 2022. And right now, what we're hearing from our partners is that they need more support for delivery and administration at country level. No one has sat by to analyze or to just look at things. We have acted, and we have acted with alacrity and urgency since the beginning, and I think more than any other country donor. I'll turn to Ambassador de Boer if he wants to say anything on the TRIPS side.
Well, thank you. I would say two things. The one is there isn't a waiver proposal yet on the table, but it's also very important to understand how the TRIPS waiver operates. The TRIPS waiver only allows a WTO member to enact domestic measures so as not to implement various provisions of the TRIPS agreement with regards to COVID-19. In other words, a TRIPS waiver would not by itself suspend patents. And then the second question with respect to Canada in the domestic context is, what exactly would Canada be suspending, and what patents does Canada hold that go towards the vaccine production or mRNA production? I'm not aware that there are any, in fact. So this is the waiver itself is waiving us from international obligations not to implement those obligations domestically.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. McPherson and colleagues. On our collective behalf, I'd like to thank our officials, Ambassador de Boer and his colleagues, for being with us this morning, for their service and for their testimony. We'll allow them to disconnect and take care of a number of housekeeping items in the next 15 minutes. The first of which takes us to two budgets from SDIR that were distributed through the Office of the Clerk on March the 4th. The first of these was for a World Food Program briefing in the amount of $575, and the second was a briefing with human rights organizations in the amount of $875. These are customary approvals for us for the work that's done by SDIR. Colleagues, any opposition to approving those budgets as presented to you by the Office of the Clerk? Okay, thank you very much. Seeing none, we've approved those. The second item is the approval of 2 of 3 work plans that were circulated also by the clerk, I believe about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, give or take. The 2 that we would like to get approval on this afternoon to allow the analysts and clerk to move forward are the work plan, the draft work plan on vaccine equity, and the one on the Taiwan Strait. There's still a residual item that needs to be clarified on the Ukraine draft work plan that will come to us in a subsequent session. But is there any discussion or objection to those draft work plans as presented by the clerk? Mr. Chung.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, there's a witness that my office had submitted for the Taiwan work plan that I would really like to have appear. His name's Dr. Steve Sang. He just to give other members of the committee some background. He is the director of the SOAS China Institute at the SOAS University of London in England. He's a professor there, and he's an expert on politics and governance in Taiwan, China, and Hong Kong, and in the foreign and security policies of China and Taiwan. He's been often quoted in leading publications in recent years, and so I think he would be a valuable witness to have appear in front of our committee because of his expertise. So that's the one witness I'd like to have appear for that Taiwan study.
Mr. Chung, thank you, and noted. Colleagues, just to remind you, if there are discussions on witnesses and prioritization that go into more detail than the presentation of qualifications, as Mr. Chung has just done, the option is at your disposal to go into an in-camera session. The committee usually does that in-camera, but if there's a quick approval here, or no objection at least to including that witness, it becomes a matter of scheduling and making sure that we have enough time for the various witnesses to be put forward. I will take Ms. McPherson next and then see if we can land this discussion without having to go in camera, but I'm in the committee's hands. Ms. McPherson, please go ahead.
Thank you, and I'll be very brief. In terms of the vaccine equity study, I just wanted to flag that the names that we brought forward for the CAMER portion were not included, and I think it's important that we have somebody on the CAMER piece, just because it is to do with how we will be able to provide vaccines around the world. So we had put forward Council of Canadians and somebody from Bolivia, so perhaps that could be considered.
Thank you very much, Ms. McPherson. If there's no additional interventions from members on this, I would maybe ask the clerk to address briefly if we can take those 2 points on board without having to do a realization among members. Just 1 second. Okay, just stand by for 1 second. I have 2 interventions. Mr. Oliphant, puis Monsieur Bergeron. Go ahead, Mr. Oliphant, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was just going to say I have no trouble at all with adding Dr. Sang. I don't know whether that means we have to take someone off or not. So I would leave that up to the clerk and analyst decision, but have absolutely no problem. I think that would be a good witness, and we should try to fit that in. And I'm even willing to go lengthier meeting, but let's, so we're willing to work with that. And fine with the other study as well. No other issues from our perspective with respect to these work plans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oliphant. That's helpful. Monsieur Bergeron, la parole à vous.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Bergeron, well, thank you. I didn't realize we would be talking about adopting these work plans here this morning, so I'm reviewing the notes that I had made quickly with respect to the work plan on vaccine equity. I want to draw the committee's attention to the fact that for the first group of witnesses, without wanting to criticize anything, Mira Jury could have provided some interesting information on the pharmaceutical side, and linked with the second group of witnesses, for meeting 4. Well, I talked about the first group for meeting 2, but with respect to the second group for meeting 4, we see that there aren't any researchers from the humanitarian side that are included there on that panel. We would have liked to have heard from Carl Blanchette, for example. So I'll just draw your attention to that. I'm still looking for my notes on Taiwan. So if you would give me a few moments, I'd like to come back to that, Mr. Chair. Well, yes, thank you, Mr. Bergeron.
What we've heard so far, it seems to be that these are questions primarily of integration of potentially 1 or 2 additional witnesses, but nothing in terms of opposition. What position does that put you in and the analysts, if given the feedback that we've received?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If the members are in agreement to add these additional witnesses and are willing to let the analysts kind of look at the work plan and see where they might slot in a way that makes sense, then we can certainly do that for you.
Okay, does that correspond to the position of members? I see some heads nodding. I know, Monsieur Bergeron, vous êtes encore en train de rechercher vos notes. Est-ce que ça vous convient?
Are you fine with that, Mr. Bergeron? I know you were still looking for your notes. Well, I wasn't paying close enough attention as I should have been because I was looking for my notes and discussing the issue with one of my assistants here. But without wanting you to ask you to repeat everything, what were you discussing exactly? I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. Do you agree with approving the work plans as presented with the comments by the clerk? Well, if the additional comments are taken into account, then I would agree with that. And if I may, I'd like to come back quickly on the work plan for Taiwan. I see that in meeting number 3, we've got Mr. Ting Shenli with the second group of witnesses. I wonder if it would be appropriate to include him there, but we don't have an objection there. And we were also wondering whether it would be a good idea to... The interpreter has lost the sound feed. I apologize, Mr. Bergeron, but your sound has cut out. Now can you hear me? Yes, now we can hear you. Did you miss everything or just part of it? Well, what I was saying then was I was wondering if it, to be more sensitive to the issues, it would be a good idea to switch the 2 groups around so that the representative from the Taipei Economic Group to Canada go first.
Some heads nodding. Il n'y a pas d'objection. Monsieur Janius?
Mr. Chair, just with respect to the vaccine equity study, I support the general shape of it, but I might want to send a follow-up note to the clerk on a couple witnesses, just suggestion here and there, but I think the general direction of it is good. Thanks.
Okay. And any objection to what Monsieur Bergeron suggested? Okay. This is helpful. Thank you, colleagues. I think we're in good shape in terms of moving this forward. It's primarily in the interest of actually keeping our studies on the rails and allowing the analysts and clerk to do the work to set up the meetings. Okay, this takes us to a final point of housekeeping, and that is a motion that Mr. Genuis wishes to present, and I will now give him the floor to do so. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Shall I read the motion, or what's the best process here?
I think it's brief enough. We still have a few minutes before 1 o'clock. So
all right. So, colleagues, I'm proposing the following motion: all written responses that have been or will be sent by witnesses to the committee arising from questions asked during public hearings since the beginning of the 44th Parliament and going forward shall be published on the committee's website, unless the committee has agreed or agrees in a particular case that particular responses shall not be made public. The rationale for this is that very often we do ask for written follow-up from witnesses on specific issues. Those are already, my understanding is from the clerk, those are already deemed public documents. documents. They're distributed to members, but they're not published anywhere, which means that we and anyone we might send them to has access to them. But if somebody who doesn't know us or is in touch with our offices is simply following the proceedings of the committee, and they want to know, okay, there was a promise of written follow-up in this particular case, and I want to find it. They perhaps have a harder time doing so. So just in the interest of transparency, just as our minutes or conversations are public, that the written follow-ups be automatically published on the website as well. We had some discussion on email about kind of the exception, the case as referred to in the motion, where the committee deems that something shouldn't be made public, and my suggestion would generally be in that case that if the chair identifies some reason that a particular written submission should not be made public, that he would delay its publication and bring the issue to the committee at the appropriate time, just saying, hey, this is something that I flagged as maybe something we shouldn't actually publish, and it would give the committee an opportunity to confirm or question the chair's decision in that case. So that would seem to me a reasonable procedure for the case where, for whatever reason, written follow-up was something we didn't want to publish. But just as a default, especially when we're dealing with government officials, if there's an issue of written follow-up, it makes sense for it to be easily accessible. So that's what the motion's about. Thanks.
Mr. Genuis, thank you very much for presenting the text of the motion and the additional commentary. I now invite discussion on the motion and a show of hands. I'm going to try to develop an integrated speakers list. I don't see any immediate hands in the room. Any colleagues wish to comment on Mr. Genuis's motion or the remarks that he made? Okay. Is there any opposition to Mr. Genuis's motion as presented? And again, I don't see any hands. Just making sure that virtually there's no hands raised. Colleagues, I think we have then agreed to Mr. Genuis's motion as presented and introduced, and unanimously. And thank you very much. And with that, we stand adjourned until our next session. Thank you very much, colleagues. Merci beaucoup. Bonne journée.